Across Britain, bread and cake feel ordinary, comfort food, habit, culture. Yet the modern baking industry didn't appear overnight. It was forged in the Victorian era, when Britain's population surged, cities exploded, and a simple loaf became one of the most important technologies of the Industrial Revolution. Cheap calories, produced at scale, day after day, night after night. This is the story of how baking changed across a few brutal decades, how rural craft baking slid into urban grind, how competition pushed some bakers into dirty tricks, and how science tried to replace yeast itself. It's also the story of the people who did the work. Exhausted hands, underground bakehouses, coal-fired ovens, and the constant pressure to feed a nation that never stopped growing. From craft to factory rhythm. In the early Victorian years, much of baking still looked like it had for centuries: small batches, local flour, family-run shops, and a rhythm tied to the village. But by the time Britain reached the 1870s, that world was being swallowed by the city. The country didn't just grow, it concentrated. Towns and industrial cities absorbed wave after wave of workers. With this shift came an obvious problem: you can't run factories without feeding people. And for the working class, bread wasn't a side dish. It was the diet. It was the main source of energy for men pulling long shifts in smoke-filled industrial landscapes. That demand changed the job of the baker. The quantities got bigger, the deadlines got tighter, and the workday stopped resembling a normal day at all. Inside an urban bakehouse. A Victorian bakehouse in an industrial town could surprise you, not because it was advanced, but because it often wasn't. You might imagine towering machines and modern systems, but many urban bakeries were still cramped spaces where the work relied on muscle more than mechanics. Coal powered everything. Bakers shoveled it, hauled it, and fed it into ovens that had to be brought to temperature the hard way. Coal dust didn't stay politely in the corner either. It drifted into the workspace, clung to hands, and settled into the air where dough was mixed and shaped. And the hours? They weren't built around comfort. They were built around customers. In cities, people wanted fresh bread early. That meant starting late. A baker's shift could begin around 11 at night and run deep into the next day. Bread for breakfast needed to be ready before the city woke up. Rolls had to come out warm and tempting. And once baking finished, delivery often began. The human cost of fresh. The job had always been physical, but the urban version of it was punishing. Dough wasn't mixed in cute little bowls, it was produced in massive troughs. Flour came in huge sacks. A single night could mean turning sacks of flour into nearly 100 loaves, big loaves too, the kind that were heavier than modern supermarket bread. Mixing by hand wasn't a quaint tradition. It was a constant battle with weight, heat, and time. The dough could be so dense that any shortcut felt tempting. Some accounts even mention bakers using their feet to knead, not as a gimmick, but as desperation. When your arms are burning and your shift has hours left, you start thinking like a survivalist. What makes it worse is that many bakehouses weren't even well ventilated. Some were literally underground, cellars used because rent was cheaper, not because it was safe. Imagine mixing heavy dough in a low-ceiling basement near a furnace, breathing flour dust with no proper airflow, night after night. It's not shocking that Victorian bakers often suffered serious health problems. The environment was a perfect storm. Dust in the lungs, heat stress, poor hygiene conditions, exhaustion, and long-term wear on the body. Bread was cheap, but not free. A plain loaf might sell for only a small amount, but even that small amount could represent a big chunk of a worker's daily wage. Bread was essential, but it still cost money. That created constant tension in the market. For bakers, flour was the biggest expense. Owners needed profit. Customers demanded low prices and white bread. Competitors undercut each other. And in cities, there were so many journeyman bakers looking for work that employers held all the power. Bakers became replaceable. In rural areas, the bakery might be family-owned and tied to a community. In urban centers, it was more likely to be run by businessmen or landlords who focused on volume and cost control. The baker was labor. The bakery was a production unit. That pressure didn't just shape working conditions, it shaped what went into the bread. The dirty secret: adulteration. Victorian customers demanded bread that looked white and pure, but that obsession often led to the opposite. With weak regulation and fierce competition, some bakers cut corners to survive. Flour was costly, so cheaper fillers and additives were used to stretch it further or improve its appearance. The most disturbing example was chalk, literally mixed into dough to bulk out loaves and make them look whiter. Another common additive was alum, which brightened bread, increased water retention, and made loaves appear heavier and more appealing. What looked like clever cost-cutting was really deception. Bread could look perfect while tasting wrong and offering little nourishment. Worse still, bakers were sometimes victims too, receiving already adulterated flour from millers. Trapped in a brutal system, many working bakers had little choice but to play along. Why weren't there machines yet? Here's the twist. This is the Industrial Revolution, so you'd expect machines to solve the problem. But in many bakehouses, mechanization arrived late and unevenly. Why? Space and cost. Installing machinery required room, power, and serious money. Many bakehouses were small, cramped, and rented. Owners could more easily squeeze extra hours out of human bodies than invest in equipment. There was also fear from workers. Mechanization threatened jobs. If a machine could replace several bakers, what happened to the journeyman already struggling to find steady work? So the industry stayed stuck longer than you might expect. Industrial Britain outside, back-breaking hand labor inside. The big disruption: aerated bread. While many small bakeries remained manual, some large operations did innovate. One of the most revolutionary changes wasn't a new kind of oven, it was a new way to raise bread. For thousands of years, bread rose through fermentation. Yeast worked slowly, producing gas that expanded the dough. But Victorians were living in an age of chemistry, carbonated drinks, and industrial experimentation. If carbon dioxide could fizz in water, why not bread? That idea produced aerated bread, dough infused with carbon dioxide under pressure, so it could rise without waiting for yeast fermentation. It promised speed, consistency, and, crucially, cleanliness. People worried about dirty bakehouses and human sweat mixing into dough. Aerated bread offered a scientific alternative that felt modern and hygienic. It didn't replace traditional bread forever, but for a time it was a genuine competitor, pulling customers away from independent bakers and pushing the industry even harder. Cheap grain, better flour, and a sweet turn. Not everything in Victorian baking was a decline into grime and cheating. Over time, Britain gained access to cheaper imported grain, especially from North America. That changed flour quality dramatically. High-gluten imported flour made better dough, stronger, stretchier, more predictable. It also changed the economy of baking. By the late Victorian period, imported flour dominated the market, reshaping British agriculture and pushing the country toward dependency on global supply chains. Meanwhile, sugar was becoming cheaper, and as prices fell, consumption rose fast. That wasn't just a diet change, it was an opportunity. Bakeries began diversifying beyond plain bread. Buns and sweet rolls became a mainstream treat, not just a luxury for the rich. One famous example is the Bath bun craze linked to the Great Exhibition era, where massive crowds created huge demand for portable sweet-baked goods. With sugar, butter, milk, and peel entering the bakehouse more regularly, morale lifted. Bakers weren't only producing survival bread anymore, they were making food people wanted for pleasure. Victorian bread didn't just feed people, it fueled an empire, often at a brutal human cost. Behind every loaf were long nights, harsh labor, and hidden compromises. If you enjoy this video, like and subscribe.